Good morning, faithful listeners. You have tuned in to the P40 Ministries podcast, the one place where you can get a daily explanatory Bible reading to start your day strong. This is your host, Jen, bringing you a brand new episode out of Matthew. Hey, friends and faithful listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to the P40 Ministries podcast. This is Jen and also Michelle Shortridge here. She is a guest on my podcast today. So Michelle, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, Jen and I go to the same church, and we've become good friends. And I also have 3 kids, and I lead the youth ministry at the church. So I'm excited that she invited me to come and help her out.
Yes, she is the youth leader with also my husband helps out with the youth as well. So I've gotten to know Michelle pretty well, unfortunately.
Really, Jen?
But today we are going to be reading Matthew 15, verses 21 through 28 today. And I will be reading out of the WEB version of the Bible. So go ahead and grab your cup of coffee. Let's go ahead and start reading. Jesus went out from there and withdrew into the region of Tyre and Sidon. Behold, a Canaanite woman came out from those borders and cried, saying, "Have mercy on me, Lord, you son of David. My daughter is severely possessed by a demon." But he answered her not a word. His disciples came and begged him, saying, "Send her away, for she cries after us." But he answered, "I wasn't sent to anyone but the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But she came and worshipped him, saying, "Lord, help me." But he answered, "It is not appropriate to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." But she said, "Yes, Lord, but even the dogs eat the crumbs which fall from their master's table." Then Jesus answered her, "Woman, great is your faith. Be it done to you, even as you desire." And her daughter was healed from that hour. If you remember last week's podcast that we did on Thursday, we were talking about how Jesus was discussing with the Pharisees some different things, especially with the rules and rituals that these Pharisees were just forcing on the people. It was just a crazy mess that these Pharisees were doing. So Jesus was talking to them and he withdrew from that region. So probably he knew that the Pharisees were pretty irritated with him, and also that he might be in some danger because they were offended. So he withdrew from that region because it wasn't his time yet to have that happen to him and to have the Pharisees become angry with him. So that is why he leaves, because it says that he withdrew into the region of Tyre and Sidon. Tyre and Sidon was actually a Gentile region. I believe that Jesus went there to actually encounter this Canaanite woman.
Yeah, to show that he wasn't there just for the Jewish people. He was there for all people and still is here for all people. It's not just a certain race or whatever. He's here for everybody.
So, Michelle, what was one of the first things that stuck out to you in this passage of Scripture?
I think it's interesting the way that she comes back to him about how even the dogs get crumbs, and she's not asking for him to move from his mission, but just to have a little bit.
Yeah. Because Jesus says here in verse 27, "Yes, Lord, but even the little dogs eat the crumbs which fall from their master's table." And that's a pretty interesting statement for sure, because she's agreeing with Jesus, almost saying that she herself is a little dog, which is a fascinating statement. Sometimes we look at this passage of Scripture and we almost think that Jesus is being kind of mean to this woman. So, Michelle, what do you think about that? Do you think Jesus is being mean or racist towards this woman?
No, I think, he is saying, this is my mission, but she wants her daughter to be healed, and so she's trying to plead her case.
Right.
And I wouldn't say Jesus was being racist. I think he was just explaining what his mission was. But then he took the time to deviate a little bit and help her.
And right, so Jesus wasn't a racist. We were actually reading a commentary, Michelle and I, before we began this podcast episode, and there was a man who was saying that he had heard somebody call Jesus a racist because of this passage of Scripture. because this woman from Tyre and Sidon would have been a Canaanite woman. So she was a different race. And typically, the Canaanites and the Jewish people kind of went head to head a lot, especially all the way from the very beginning of almost Genesis. At this point, the Canaanites and the Jewish population did not have a very good relationship with each other. So this man was saying that he heard somebody call Jesus a racist.
Because he didn't answer her.
Yeah, because he didn't answer her and, he was avoiding her or something like that. But that wasn't actually the case. Yeah, because it says in verse 23 that he answered her not a word. So, Michelle, why do you think that this Canaanite woman was almost being ignored by Jesus? What do you think Jesus's purpose here was? Because he certainly wasn't a racist. So what was happening here?
It's been interpreted different ways. It could be that he was just kind of letting to see what she would do next. It's, where the disciples ask him to send her away. There's speculation that it was because they were tired of her, because of her crying and going on, or that she was, that they wanted her to be sent away by healing. So there's just different speculations, but as to why he didn't answer her right away, I think that was part of, let's see what happens next kind of thing. Like, what is she going to do? Is she going to keep asking, or is she going to just give up?
Yeah, Jesus often does challenge people, doesn't
Yeah.
he? Yeah. I mean, he challenged the young rich man. There's actually a few people I can think of that he challenged. He challenged his disciples constantly.
Absolutely.
So, this Gentile woman, he's treating her, honestly, very equally as to anybody else that he would have encountered, just challenging them and seeing where their faith is. And that's a very typical response of Jesus, is just checking people's faith. And he ends up saying to this Canaanite woman that her faith was great. It says in verse 28, Jesus said to her, "Woman, your faith is great." And he gave her exactly what she wished for, because her daughter was severely possessed by a demon. And that was why she was pleading with Jesus, "Lord, help me." Now, one other thing I noticed here was the fact that in verse 22, she immediately said to Jesus when she saw him, "Lord, Son of David, my daughter is severely possessed by a demon." So what's the significance of the term Son of David, Michelle?
She's recognizing exactly who he is. Her as a Canaanite woman, knowing who he is when he came into this area and hadn't even performed a miracle or done anything, and she immediately recognizes who he is and says, "I know you are Lord. I know you are the Son of David."
Right, exactly. So this Canaanite woman, this is the interesting part, this Canaanite woman had more faith in who Jesus was than even Jesus's own disciples.
Exactly.
Because the disciples had to see all these signs and wonders and all this stuff before they even recognized Jesus as the Messiah. I think it was actually the last chapter in Matthew 14 when they finally recognized him as the Son of God, when he had walked on the water towards them. So they had to see this crazy sign that no one else even saw, which was Jesus walking on water. But this Canaanite woman immediately recognized Jesus as the Son of David, or another word for the Messiah. Son of David meant Messiah. So she was recognizing Jesus for who he was, the Messiah. So after her complete and total persistence with Jesus and just constantly asking him for help to heal her daughter, Jesus finally recognizes her after the disciples are like begging him, saying, "Send her away," because she's crying after this. So the disciples are clearly getting annoyed with this woman because they're asking Jesus at this point, just, "Can you get rid of her? She's just following after us and being persistent, and she's becoming really annoying, so send her away." So finally, after the disciples say this, Jesus turns to the woman and he says, "I wasn't sent to anyone but to the lost sheep of the house of Israel," which is an interesting statement because he was the one who had come to Tyre and Sidon in the first place. But she falls down before him and kneels before him, worshiping, saying, "Lord, help me." It's an interesting statement now that I'm looking at that. She had just heard Jesus's response that he had only come to the house of Israel, the children of Israel, but she's saying, "Help me as well."
And a lot of things say that in kneeling, that's a sign of respect, a sign of that you are, you kneel before kings, and by her kneeling in front of him to worship him and asking for help, that's a sign of respect for his position.
Yeah, I like what you said there, Michelle, because it shows even more about the woman's just respect for Jesus and just the fact that she truly did believe that he was the Messiah. So she was kneeling before him, and she said, "Lord, help me." So he answers her right after this, and he says something kind of weird. And we already kind of discussed this at the beginning, but I'd like to go over it one more time. He says to the woman as she's kneeling before him, "It's not appropriate to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." Now, these dogs would have been little household pets. I have one of my own. Michelle does not care for him very much.
He likes me too much.
Yes, he likes Michelle a lot. So Michelle is not a big fan of him, but he really is a sweet little guy. But he's a little tiny dog. He's a Jack Russell Terrier, and he's crazy. And, when I am eating, he will sit there and stare at me with those big giant eyes, and he's waiting for me to just drop any kind of crumb that I can possibly drop so he can just gobble it right up. But he's part of my family. He's a sweet little guy, and I absolutely adore him. But when Jesus is saying this, he's saying to this woman, it's not appropriate to take from the children, but give it to the dogs. So he's almost calling this Canaanite woman a little dog, right?
Yeah, and he's calling, the house of Israel the children, and it's not appropriate for him to take from the children and give to the dogs.
Right.
And her response is, but even the dogs get the crumbs that fall from the table, and that's all she's asking for is crumbs. She's not asking for his full attention and everything. She's asking for scraps.
Right. She's asking for just whatever he can give her. So she's fully recognizing that she is not of the house of Israel, that she is just a Gentile Canaanite woman. But she's okay with that. And this was Jesus, I believe, testing her and seeing where her faith was and just seeing if her faith was a true faith or just a recognition of it. Right, Michelle?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. See how deep it was. Do I just recognize who he is, or do I fully believe who he is?
Right. And then Jesus ends up healing her daughter. And it says, I think there was another version. I think this story is also written down in Mark as well.
Yes.
And the version in Mark actually says that the woman went home and saw that her daughter was healed in Mark 7, verses 29 through 30, if you want to read that. But in Matthew, it kind of just ends the story with the fact that her daughter was just healed from that very hour. One last thing before we conclude, I just want to talk about Jesus' reply to her at the very end in verse 28. He says, "Woman, great is your faith." This would have been a very strong response that Jesus had. He was very emotional when he said this. And every single time it seems like Jesus says, "Great is your faith," it tends to be with Gentiles, I just noticed.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, me too.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting that is unfortunately the case, but he is saying to this woman, your faith is very great. Well, Michelle, thank you so much for coming on the podcast with me. I don't know about you guys, but I thought she had some great insights. She's giving me the stink eye right now.
You're giving it right back. No, thanks for having me. It was an experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I am so glad you were able to come on the show today. So thank you so much for joining us on P40 Ministries. Well, it's been pretty cold here in the States. It's like record lows right now or something like that. It's freezing, but I'm just going to ask everybody that you stay safe and stay warm. And thank you so much for tuning in. Happy listening, and God bless.